I apologize. I just hit stop on my computer for some reason. So the variables become voluminous, really. They multiply and make it much more difficult for us to do research and make claims based on the data that we receive about those multitudes of digital messaging opportunities that are had. So digital media becomes extremely difficult to study. However, digital media does give campaigns something that they never used to have, and that is a lot of times free coverage, free media, free messaging opportunities that are almost limitless, right? Because we used to only have so many television stations, so much bandwidth on the radio and on the television. We are not limited by bandwidth or channels in digital media. There does not need to be that limitation anymore, which, by the way, makes researching extremely difficult because it gets rid of all of the boundaries that we would normally use in order to study the political communications going on and in order to predict what political messaging is going to work and how effective the political messaging is. I hope that makes sense to you. And that's one of the reasons why we're all, when I say we, I mean scholars in the field of political communication are starting to do things like, let's talk about the general political discourse, not let's look at exactly what advertising works, because we're finding that very difficult to isolate. We're finding the variables very difficult to operationalize. And we're finding it easier to say things like the general political discourse, the public discourse is this, generally speaking, as opposed to this type of ad works, this type of message works, here's who you need to appeal to. The market, in other words, the audience has shifted greatly. And that's another reason why we can't study political communication the way that we used to. The next thing that I said I was going to talk about was gender. Now, the way that we used to study gender differences in communication was literally based on people who identified as female. No, it wasn't people who identified. If you were determined to be sexually female or sexually male, and those were the only two that we had to work with, then there were expectations for how a woman would communicate and expectations for how a man would communicate. And there was no question about whether they were using a feminine style or a more masculine style of communication because it was just man, woman. When we started to understand that there was a difference in a feminine style of communication and a masculine style of communication, then we started to understand a little bit differently what happens when the genders are different in the same political situation. One of the ways that we started to study that was by Carlin Kors Campbell, Campbell. Carlin Kors Campbell really wanted to study women in politics. She was one of the first. I think I've mentioned her before in this class. She studied what she called the feminine style of communicating and in politics. And what that looked like was that women, females, those with a feminine style, men with a feminine style, would use the word we more than I. So they would use sort of the plural nouns as opposed to the singular. They were more invitational in the way that they would construct their argument. They would say to the audience, not, this is how it is. They would say, work with me here in understanding our experiences and what it means. The feminine style also focused in content on female issues, okay? Now, that might sound silly to you, but men do sometimes adopt a feminine style and talk about issues that seem to be only for women. But we know that's not the case anymore. I mean, after all, the people who make health department decisions on the federal level are 7 men for female issues, women's issues. And that's important to understand, but there's certainly not the old way of saying, well, you're a man, so you can only say so much, or you're a woman, so you can only say things a certain way. That doesn't work anymore. Now, Campbell's work went beyond just male and female, really, but people started to realize something very important. When a woman, a person who identifies as female, uses the feminine style, well, she's just expected to do that. When someone who identifies as a man, as a male, uses the feminine style, oh, they've done such a good job. They did the masculine style, they did the feminine style. Look at how they try to appeal to everyone. A woman who identifies as female and uses the masculine style is considered to be aggressive, angry, too assertive. If you don't believe me, look at the time period. I just realized this is your history, not your life. When Hillary Clinton was running for president, and John McCain picked Sarah Palin to be his running mate. So she was running for vice president. The way that we were viewing these two women was very, very different. Sarah Palin identifies as a woman, and she has a very feminine style of speaking. What that led to was a hypersexualization of Sarah Palin as a human being. She became completely sexualized. Her political knowledge went out the window. People did not think she was smart. They thought she was pretty. And that was what was important. And if you don't believe me, there are magazines out there from that era that show pictures of Sarah Palin on the front cover. And the pictures are taken like between her legs, literally. So if you can imagine standing behind a speaker at the level of their calves and taking a picture showing the back of the person, mainly their legs, and then an audience that's sort of out there looking up at her. Imagine the kind of sexualization that is. Versus Hillary Clinton, where they talked about her cankles and the fact that she always wore a pantsuit. Because she had a more masculine style of presenting herself. So damned if you do, damned if you don't, if you're a woman in politics. This was an argument that Campbell made just in the early 2000s. Well, actually the mid 2010s. What am I saying? Around 2008, when we were having those debates, was when it really became a problem. And so she wrote a couple of works. One was called Hating Hillary, which talks about not the feminine style, but woman as speaker. And by the way, she did make the sex difference, not the gender difference here. So she argued that while there are gender differences in the way that people communicate, whether male, female, however you identify, neither, both, fluid, etc., that the style of communication that you picked didn't matter because people were going to view you as they wanted to. And if you were a woman, you were really in trouble. You were not going to be able to win the audience over. Now, I happen to disagree with this a little bit, and I'll tell you why. Because things have changed. And I would love to sit down with Carlin like right now and have a conversation with her about this. But she's been retired for many, many years. I don't think she's having these conversations anymore. But how do we explain Lauren Boebert? How do we explain Marjorie Taylor Greene? How do we explain these outspoken, masculine style women who are also considered very attractive, physically speaking, who are loud and aggressive, very assertive? And the answer, I think, to that question is going to be they get made fun of or they get ignored, right? And look, I'm not saying that everything that those people say is meritorious or worthy of great political instinct and policy making, but it wouldn't matter if it was, because people would still assign the meaning that they want to assign to it based on their perceived gender and communication style. So, Carlin Corrs Campbell, I love you, but things have changed. I'm not sure how else to put that. The way that we view gender and the way that we view it in politics particularly has substantially impacted the way that we receive messages, less so from men, more so from women as they identify. So we throw that out too. So what have I gotten rid of? I've gotten rid of types of political ads. I've gotten rid of media. I've gotten rid of the impact of negative and positive ads. Did I just say that? The types of speeches that are in a campaign and those rhetorical environments, and gender. What's left? Well, the answer is that everything else is left. And since we don't know which questions to ask, we certainly haven't figured out how to answer them either. And so when I say that there is a great deal of confusion about what I should teach you in political communication, I'm not joking. I'm dead serious. There is a great deal of confusion. We can learn from previous research in a limited way. And the question is, do we want to learn all those models to say, hey, I learned the history of political communication study? Maybe, which is why I did this little thing today, and why I talked about political ads before, and I talked about video style in the last video that you got, I believe. So the question is, where do we go from here in political communication in terms of digital media? And the answer to that question is, I think anyone who has learned how to use social media for the purpose of any campaign, be that a marketing campaign, a PR campaign, or a political campaign, understands that we're going to send out messages that are going to sometimes work and sometimes not work. And we're going to do exactly what we did way back when Bernays and others started writing about public relations and commercials and advertising understanding campaigns. And that is, let's study it. Let's figure it out. Let's see if we can find a way to answer those questions, to come to conclusions about how we can predict what messages will work and which messages will not, which channels are better and which channels are not, keeping in mind at all times that the medium is the message. McLuhan was way ahead of his time. Trust me on that. So what are we going to do with digital media in politics? Well, the answer to that question is what I want to ask you for your discussion board this week, which is, how would you go about studying digital media and politics, political communication in digital media? Would you limit the number of media that you use, the types of media? Would you limit the audiences? Would you look for, only things coming from one particular political candidate? Would you do a comparison? In other words, what variables would you want to look at? What are the interesting questions that we would ask? For me, my questions are still based in television, radio, political ads. I've still got the old school questions. When I look at digital media, I tend to get overwhelmed. So let me ask you, how would you narrow down the study of political communication in digital media? So in the digital world, what are some ways we might be able to ask the questions to find out what political communication should look like, when it's effective, what types of messaging we should be using? It sounds like a big task, but I'm not asking you to solve the problems here. I'm just asking you to come up with some ideas of variables that we should look at when studying political communication in the digital age. So I'll be putting that up on the discussion board and looking forward to your answers. That, of course, won't be due until next Monday. In the meantime, I hope you all are recovering from whatever Thanksgiving feast you might have had. We didn't have much of a feast here at my house, so we did eat a lot of pizza on Friday night for some reason. So, I'm still stuffed from that, I think. But I hope that you are looking forward to the semester winding down. I don't know that I'll give you a reading necessarily about any of these things because, as I said, they're pretty outdated. But what I may do is look for another article talking about the difficulty of studying politics in digital media, just like I did last time. All right, I will talk to you guys later this week. I hope that you have, a relaxing end to the semester. We'll talk soon.